Welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. Here's your host, Tom Bourne.
Hi, and welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. I'm your host, Tom Bourne, and with me this afternoon is the wonderful Sarah Thomas. Sarah, how are you?
Great, Tom. Glad to be here.
We're certainly glad to have you on. How is the weather in your part of the neck of the woods?
It's actually a little bit disappointed. We were supposed to have a snow hazard warning yesterday, and it hasn't really come to much. And as I live in Cromwell, which is between Queenstown and Wanaka, two of the key ski areas in New Zealand, and we could really do with a good dumping of snow right now.
I think I've seen snow twice in my life, and I don't ski because of various things, but I'll blame poor knee health, not lack of skill or anything. So it doesn't really probably excite me as much as you. Okay, Sarah, I've got you on the show because you're fairly frequent on LinkedIn and you're in and around the safety type of sphere. So I know a little bit about you and the views because you're pretty eloquent in expressing them online. But for those who haven't heard of you yet, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've done professionally in the past, and what you're currently up to?
Well, my health and safety career pretty much started way back in 1993 when I was a surf lifeguard. I think it's the ultimate risk management in a dynamic setting because every time the sea goes out, tide changes, everything can change. And I sort of went to university, got a BA LLB, sort of joke about how I majored in ski patrol and running around doing hydrography with the Naval Reserves. Also interesting because ski patrol, I really got into avalanche awareness and digging pits and learning how to manage that hazard. With the Navy, I really enjoyed damage control school, so that was all interesting. Went off, did a few years of ski patrol, outdoor instructing, general traveling around the world, being a bit of a bum. Came back to New Zealand and landed in, back then it was Transrail. So I ended up in network standards and safety for our rail corridor in New Zealand. And then I spent some time in oil and gas, heavy manufacturing. I sort of got to a crux point in my career and decided I needed to do a little bit of an eat, pray, love episode. So I quit for a year. That turned into a little bit longer because I went back to Temple Basin where I started ski patrol and was a hut custodian. Then I ended up working for the Department of Conservation. And I met my partner, now husband, Jeff, while we were both living in Dockhouse 2 in Franz Joseph on the West Coast, another beautiful area of the world. Jeff ended up deciding to go to surveying school. So we ended up in Dunedin. And that's when I started my consultancy in 2011. And I've been working with small to medium businesses ever since. I really love the variety of consulting. I do work for some bigger companies, but predominantly most of my clients are sort of 20 to 30 workers in high hazard sort of areas. They can't afford to have an in-house health and safety person, so they just want someone that's going to work with them as a safety partner. And today I live, as I said, in Cromwell. I've got an 8-year-old son called Ollie, who is a little adventure beast with the rest of us. We like skiing and mountain biking and hiking, and a little dog who's a Ken Terrier like Harry McCleary called Tussock. That's pretty much where we're at.
It's interesting. The next guest next week on the host on the pod is from Cromwell, but it's Cromwell in England. So
oh wow,
yeah, interesting. I think
geographically opposed.
I think one of the questions I asked him was why Cromwell. So what's attractive about Cromwell, New Zealand?
To be really honest, being heavily into the outdoors, Jeff and I wanted to live in central Otago. However, Wanaka and Queenstown are very expensive. So there were two things. One, is Jeff got a fabulous job at a company called Lampro when he came out of university. And two, we could actually afford to buy a house here. And the irony of it is the housing market's still absolutely crazy down here. And we're very, very grateful that we bought our house in 2016 because of, yeah, as I said, you can be hardworking dual income families and paying horrendous rent at the moment, which is just a reality for a lot of people.
Yeah. My wife's originally from Auckland, and she tells me about the awesome prices for pretty ordinary houses there at the moment.
Yeah.
To be honest, I'm glad I'm not there.
Yeah, I can understand that. And it's the old housing stock in New Zealand, like there's a lot of problems with mold and insulation and asbestos, all sorts of things. So yeah, it's not a fun place to be, particularly if you want to raise a family.
Yeah. Can understand that. All right. Looking into your past, I look at people's what they've achieved academically, and you can usually see a sort of a linear path from where they originally thought of to where they're going. It's not quite that for you. I'd say it was a fairly unusual path. Bachelor in Political Science. What was the thought there? Bachelor of Arts, Political Science?
When I was at school, I really loved debating and public speaking. And so everyone's like, go to law school, it'll be great. And I decided I wanted to do pol sci because I wanted to learn more about the world. The interesting thing is I always maintained that my law degree taught me to regurgitate, whereas my pol sci degree taught me how to think. So it's lots of stuff around, international relations, war, conflict. And I also did a few philosophy papers, which I'm really grateful for. And probably one of my favorite papers was called Antarctic Studies.
Very good, very good. Yeah, look, it was one of those things I always wanted to do. I did a crazy qualification, degree, which is the Bachelor of Arts in Terrorism and Counterterrorism. And
wow.
Yeah, people go, and what were you thinking at the time? And I go, yeah, you don't really want to know, but okay, you at the moment great for critical thinking, but then you moved into the safeties field. So you talked about surf lifesaving. I've got to be honest, does New Zealand have any decent beaches?
Yeah, we have a lot of decent beaches. And I did actually patrol at Piha. There is the original Bondi rescue was actually at Piha, and then the show format was stolen by Australia. But that was 24 years ago when I was still happy to run around in a swimsuit in public. Great waves. We also, it depends what you want. If you want surfing, there's fantastic surfing at Mount Maunganui down in Dunedin. If you want to feel like you're in Fiji, head up to somewhere like Kiri Pai here in the Bay of Islands. We've actually got a bigger coastline than the mainland United States.
Yeah. You really should.
Charts, that is.
You really should perhaps think of a career in tourism for New Zealand, because that's a spectacular little spiel you're given. Makes me want to go and perhaps visit family of sorts. All right. You'd had a role as a community relations ranger. Not quite sure, but what does that actually do?
Sadly, that role doesn't exist anymore. So in New Zealand, the Department of Conservation is a lot like your National Park Service. And this community relations role to me was fantastic because sort of part one was looking at community engagement and environmental conservation programs with both schools and the general public. And that brought in all my outdoor instructing stuff, because when I was in England, I got my level 2 City and Guilds and worked with 8 to 12-year-olds. So that was my absolute happy space. And the other side of it was concession management. And the interesting thing is, so conservation land is given different designations. So it could be a national park or a conservation area or a scenic reserve. And depending what that designation is, depends on what sort of commercial attributes you could do in that area. So you end up having to pay for the concession to be doing something on public land. Now, the super fun side of it was I got to go on a heli hike on Franz Josef Glacier with the Franz Josef Glacier guides to audit that they were meeting the requirements of their concession, which strangely enough is very similar to health and safety audit. I also got to do helicopter whitewater rafting up the Whataroa River, which is known as the Grand Canyon of New Zealand, and that was spectacular. The things that were not so fun was doing things like farming concessions and black sand mining concessions, because so there'd be these odd strips of land beside a river or a creek, and essentially it was just part of a big farm paddock. And the challenge is the conservation land is supposed to be managed by conservation values, and the farmland you want to manage by good farm management practices. And I'd be turning up in my two-wheel drive Ford Ranger, praying that I didn't get stuck and have to be towed out by a tractor. And, you know, originally I thought that a strainer was something you got your kayak stuck in. I had no idea it was part of a fence. And so that was a really steep learning curve. And then the black sand mining, you know, there'd be two of us and we'd go out on a quad bike down these areas to check that people were doing the right quotas and things. But, you know, part of you was like, am I going to come across a meth lab or someone's cash crop? Like, you just had, it was so remote and you had no idea what you're doing. So, you know, luckily I didn't have any dreadful experiences, but it was definitely out of my comfort zone. And the weird thing is, as soon as you put on that ranger uniform, people assume that you know everything. And yeah, I don't know, the Department of Conservation is evidently probably one of the highest qualified government departments for the lowest pay. And you'd talk to people and they're like, oh yes, I have a doctorate in avian studies, and they're just, well, I shouldn't say just, they're a Kiwi ranger that's going and getting Kiwi eggs to protect the endangered species. But it's not sort of the role that you'd normally associate a high-level doctor doing. So it was a fantastic, it's back then, before all the restructuring and changes that came through, it's the job where people actually lived the company values. Like the Kiwi Rangers would be volunteering to go and do Kiwi counts with members of the public on the weekends because they love doing it. You know, like that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So really enjoyed it. It was an amazing time.
Speaking of endangered species, I'm just curious. Over here in Australia, in certain parts of Australia, the residents of certain areas are very passionate about everyone should keep their cats inside because they're killing native wildlife. And my lovely wife says, there's none of that in New Zealand. And I don't know. Kiwis are pretty helpless, aren't they? Wouldn't you try and keep cats from attacking them? But is there much of an emphasis on, you know, keeping domestic animals away from endangered wildlife in New Zealand?
Well, they've tried really hard to get them off Stewart Island, which is one specific area. And you have to remember that the way New Zealand developed, there weren't any land-based carnivores or predators. So what that means is that a lot of our birds are flightless and put their nests in silly places where they can be predated really easily. So things like dogs, cats, stoats, weasels, ferrets, all of these things that have been introduced have, you know, it's wreaked havoc. And there are some areas where they've put up big predator-proof fences. There are some areas where they put populations of animals out on islands to get them away from the rats and cats and everything else. There has been a couple of people that have tried to really raise arguments about not having domestic cats, and that has faced some really robust anti-discussion, shall we say that. It's but then again, there's bigger issues to talk about at the moment. We're in an election year, and yeah, it's going to be really interesting for both business and health and safety and a whole lot of other things, depending on who our next government is.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. You've done something that most people have ever spitballed, and anyone who likes Instagram and that goes, "Oh wow, that'd be so cool," which is travel writing. Travel writing. How on earth did you get into that?
Well, I'd done a couple of years for the Department of Conservation, and what I decided to do, I'd always wanted to do travel writing. I'd always loved writing. And there was a diploma in travel writing that I did. And that was fantastic because it taught me everything from how to, scope and pitch a story to editors, how to put things online, how to take photographs to highlight the story, understanding different types of writing, because online writing is very different to writing for a magazine or a newspaper. Journalism standards and ethics, which was really interesting, like what you can and can't print, and even had the business side of things, how to set yourself up as a sole trader, what an invoice looks like. I sort of joke in some ways the travel writer was almost like the training wheels to becoming a health and safety consultant. And I'm actually quite proud of the fact that I managed, sorry, Tussock, the dog is barking in the background. I managed to break even, if not make some money. And I also did a little bit of motel cleaning on the side. And it was a wild time. Really, really enjoyed it. However, it's not really sustainable long term.
No. Yeah, lots of dream jobs are on the margin, shall we say, but that's all right. Of the places you visited in your extensive travels, what's the favourite?
Actually got two. One was after I did my ski patrol season in Tahoe, we went and visited Yosemite National Park. And that park just blew me away. We were really lucky because we're sort of going in the spring, so it wasn't crazy busy. And that sense of insignificant you get from these massive cliffs and huge waterfalls, it was magical as far as I was concerned. And the other one was in 2019, we went on an extended family trip with, my parents and my sister and her family, and we went to Vietnam, and we were in Da Nang. And I just loved Vietnam, visually, the jungles, the beaches are magnificent. And then sort of we went into Hoi An, and they had the beautiful markets. Like, it was just a visual feast of so much to see and taste and do and smell. And I really loved the people. And I think probably one of the most interesting things about Vietnam is they literally have been invaded right back to, I think it was about 800 BC that the Chinese first invaded them. And then they had the Mongolian people came through, and then there was like China again, then France, then Japan, then the USA. So even though they have their, very specific traditions associated with their country, there's been imprints from all these other different influences. And the people were just beautiful. They were just so kind and calm. Again, though, I was in the tourist areas, and I completely own that. Like, if I lived there full time, I might have a different view. But that was just my impression of it.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Karina's view of Vietnam is pretty much the same. So that's good. That's good. All right. One of the things I see, well, I won't say regularly, but quite often, is you put out this little post on LinkedIn, which is view from the scaffold, which is awesome. Absolutely love it. I love the idea of it. But where did that come from?
Well, it's actually, it's a bit sad, really. The last year and a half have been really hard. My dad died suddenly. My mum didn't cope with his death well. Then my mum got cancer. And I have to say that it is really hard when you are running a consultancy and trying to do the best for your clients and everyone else, and yet the world's imploding around you. And so, I have this amazing counselor who's been supporting me through that. And one of the things she said to me is, you need to focus on joy. And the thing is, one of the companies I work for, they're artisan roofers. Like, they do beautiful copper architectural crafted roof. And I love being up there and seeing that. And the other thing is, I actually, I think that a well-made scaffold is a thing of art as well. So what I was trying to do is that rather than turning up to the site inspection and blazing through it and telling everyone what they were doing wrong, I forced myself to stop, take a moment, have a breath, and take this photo. And yeah, and it's actually sort of gone a little bit viral. Like, there's Jo Prigmore, who's the general manager of health and safety for Fulton Hogan. She's been posting them. Troy Beaumont, who I actually knew when he worked for the Franz Josef Glacier Guides, he now runs a fabulous rope access company, and he's posted a few from the scaffold companies, photos as well, of like his boys doing rock work in spectacular locations. And I think we as a safety profession need to do more of celebrating that sort of thing. The fact that we do get out and we meet some fantastic people and we see some fantastic work. And I also think that scaffolders are probably one of the most underrated trades, because basically, like, my crews, I've got a couple of different clients that couldn't do their job if the scaffolding wasn't there. And so I kind of, it's a lot of things. It's giving me personal joy. It's taking a moment to appreciate where I'm at, and it's, appreciating workmanship too.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you have, but it's one of those things that I think would do very well on other forms of social media as well, because it's impressive. It's impressive, and I don't say that lightly, and I don't say that to everyone. So well done with that. I don't know if you're aware that seems to be a great consensus over here in Australia that if anyone is working in scaffolding in Australia, you can guess which country they come from.
New Zealand?
New Zealand. I kid you not.
Yeah.
I kid you not. All right. You also come across professionally as a very well-read person, and the posts you actually do are, I don't know, well-constructed and literate. Being well-read, has there been any book in particular or any author in particular that has shaped your views on safety more significantly than others?
Well, unfortunately, because I've read so many books, I cut it down to the top 4 and then the one I really want to talk about. So when I started consulting, the 2 books that probably had the biggest impact on me was Todd Conklin's Pre-Accident Investigation and Eric Hollnagel's Safety 1 and Safety 2. Then more recently, I've really loved Amy Edmondson's Fearless Organisation, David Proven's A Field Guide to Safety, and have you heard of The Prepared Leader by Erica James and Lynn Perry-Wooten?
I may have, but I not off the top of my. Let's show it. Oh, look at that! Look at that, beautiful.
Yeah,
I'll get a copy.
It's all about crisis management, and the whole people, planet, profit, and it's very, very interesting book, very practical. But my all-time favorite, which I think I have somewhere on my desk, I've probably hidden it somewhere, is it's this one. It's Rosa Antonio Carrillo's The Relationship Factor in Safety Leadership. And Rosa's actually one of my mentors.
Oh,
and
she is so awesome. She is so awesome. You're so lucky.
Well, that's another thing, like, how you said with your podcast, how you sit there and can't believe you're talking to these amazing people. I had some really great conversations with Rosa on LinkedIn, just messaging. And then I said, put my big girl pants on and said, would you please mentor me? So once a month we meet up and just talk about things. I call them the fireside chats, and literally having Rosa on tap. She's my wise woman, and she's done so many incredible things. I mean, to still be producing books like this in her 70s, I'm like, that's who I want to be. And she's still so engaged and so sharp with what she's saying. And yeah, I really love the whole idea of safety is really about building relationships, having effective conversations, and then demonstrating leadership. It's to me, it's what she's done is it's a whole lot of stuff from HR, quality, and health and safety that's just been distilled together.
Yep.
And I love the fact that you learn so much through narrative and just stories and things, whether it's your own examples or someone else's. Like, I get really frustrated when you see these big involved arguments on LinkedIn where people are like, just, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And I'm like, well, can you give me a practical example? So no, that's definitely read this year. Got one of the first copies, and it's amazing.
Very good. I got to tell you, with those arguments on LinkedIn, I used to be willing to bite, willing to get involved. Now I'm just like, if someone comes out and rubbishes me or anything, I just let it through to the keeper. I just go, it is not worth my time and effort debating someone online if they've got a different view. It's I feel like even on LinkedIn, if you don't like what someone's saying, just keep scrolling. Just keep scrolling. You don't have to assassinate their character or anything like that. It's we're all adults, and we're all. What did I hear the other day? I heard a good quote. It said, opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one. And I went, true, absolutely true. But no, she's amazing. And congratulations for actually asking, because that's the thing when I think most people don't realize. They go, oh, I couldn't do this. I could. Well, you can't if you don't ask.
I'm literally meeting up with her tomorrow morning on Zoom. And it's, as I said, it's one of the highlights of my month.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to ask you one that I haven't really thought about until this morning. It's currently in New Zealand. There's a court case going on, a high-profile court case about White Island, and some pretty significant evidence has come out already about the lack of preparedness and the lack of safety measures that had been put in place. Has New Zealand ever, I don't know the answer, so I'm just curious. To your knowledge, how's that? Rather will temper than asking you directly. To your knowledge, has New Zealand ever jailed directors or company executives over safety matters?
No.
And
one of the, he's not actually going to be standing in the next election, but there are definitely people in National that want to bring in corporate manslaughter. And I suspect that if National does get into play after the next election, they'll rip the guts out of a whole lot of stuff, but they will try and bring that in. And although, again, it's really interesting. So the best person I reckon to talk to about Whakaaro and what's going on there is Grant Nicholson. Have you met him?
No, I have not.
Oh, he's sort of the Greg Smith of New Zealand. And Greg Smith has some wonderful stuff. He's already, because he did a lot around Pike River, because a lot of our new legislation was a direct result of Pike River. And I think the thing from Whakaaro, which I find really hard, is I look at it, I've got my legal brain, I've got my outdoor instructing experience, and then I've got I'm a mother of an 8-year-old that could have been on that trip, because it's the sort of thing that our family would consider doing. And what's fascinating to me is there is such a patchwork quilt, like it's a lattice of issues that has come together. And at the moment, they seem to be just focusing on dollars, waivers, and disclaimers. Whereas I'm kind of like what's really interesting to me is, first of all, there's an island in Hawaii that does very similar tours, and you had to wear full overalls, like boiler suit, to do that. Didn't do that on Whakaare. And it blows my mind that there are people that lived or died according to their clothing choice that day.
Yep.
There was a guide that was in charge of a group of 7 people that couldn't speak English. There's this whole thing around, so the helicopters landing is not a tourism activity, so that didn't get audited according to the tourism activity framework, which came out of a riverboarding accident a while ago. And then the boats were assessed under maritime safety, like, is the ship seaworthy? Does it have flares? Does it have life jackets? But no one talked about, well, what's your emergency evacuation plan if the volcano erupts? Because, you could also have a tidal wave. What are you going to do?
Yeah. There
There was a jetty there that you really could only access sort of at mid to low tide. Again, that place in Honolulu, they had refuges, like mining refuges at the wharf and up at the crater. There was a refuge on the island. It was over at GNS. So that's comparing across jurisdictions. But within our jurisdiction, we have Ruapehu and Narahoe. So Ruapehu hopefully still has 2 ski fields on it because they just about went bankrupt. But GNS has a really robust reporting system around volcanoes, lahars, everything, the ski area operators, the mountain bikers in the summer, the people doing the Tongariro crossing, really detailed evacuation and emergency plans, nothing to that standard on Whakaare. So there's a lot of questions to be asked. But here's another thing, though. I'm pretty sure it was earlier this year. It showed a whole lot of families out on the island putting up a memorial stone to everyone that had died. And there were people in jandals and shorts.
Yep.
And that to me just blows my mind. And again, when I was in rail, we had someone die on top of a multiple unit because they touched the KVA and they had severe burns. And, when I did volunteer ambulance, I've seen people with severe burns. It is a horrible, miserable way to die. And the fact that, there's a whole lot of people from Australia and everywhere else. Yeah, and the thing is, GNS had communicated that they were at level 2, but there is so much in that story and so much complexity to that story. And again, sorry, my dog's barking again. I'm going to be very interested to see how it rolls out in the courts. As I said, at the moment, the fact that they're getting caught up in waivers and disclaimers, and that to me has already been resolved under civil legislation, civil law, isn't the real issues. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
I see public opinion and I understand public opinion. My thoughts are that probably no one will go to jail. It will be one of these things that everyone goes, oh, it was a horrible accident, it was unforeseen, blah blah blah. But it's hard to argue that you didn't know what was available when things on similar places around the world were publicly accessible about what the practices are and that. It's hard to argue that you've done everything reasonably practicable to protect those people when it's blindingly obvious you haven't. But the other thing I'll say about that is I wouldn't get too excited about industrial manslaughter or a version of it for New Zealand unless it is crafted carefully, because you would expect with the increase in fatalities, etc., that we've had in Australia in the last couple of years at the workplace, that more people would be not only charged but successfully prosecuted. And except for less than a handful, it's just not the case, because the legislation is constructed that there is such a high threshold of evidence that must be met for a prosecution to be successful that, in my opinion at least, it's highly unlikely that many people will ever see that. And whether the legislation was originally put in just to satisfy the public demand for we're doing something, but then that would suggest it's almost tokenistic, or just feeding the chooks. We're just throwing some breadcrumbs out to people to keep them happy.
I feel like it's dog whistling as well. And Greg Smith, who's far better versed in this, has a lot of really interesting things to say. And for me, the top line on that is, yes, you can have corporate manslaughter. Yes, you can try and get your pound of flesh, but it's still not a deterrent to actually stop the thing happening in the first place. And that's the other thing is, I need to make it very clear that this Whakaare White Island thing, it's been horrific because it took over 2 years for the investigation to be done, and then it's taken nearly 2 years to get to court. And it has deeply affected so many people, and all the cliches come out, and I don't want to be an armchair expert. I just hope that we do actually learn some lessons, because again, I don't know if you know about this, but we had another incident recently up in the Abbey Caves where there was an outdoor instructing teacher that took a group of boys into a cave, and one of them drowned in flash flooding. Now, from what I've gleaned from the newspapers, the fact pattern is very, very similar to what happened to the Maniatoto Gorge at the Edmund Hillary Centre. And they'd planned to go rock climbing and said can't do it because it's too wet. One of the parents rang up the headmaster and said, hey, look, my son's not doing this. Why are you doing this? The headmaster said, hey, look, I back the instructor. He's making the call. He's going to do it. I know that area, and they had to walk past a massive sign that's like 1 meter high and 0.5 meter wide saying prone to flash flooding. And where this gets me is, when I was in England, one of the centres that I worked at, we took kids down into the Dartmoor Cave system. So for a week, I had to be in the van with the radio. Then I had to do, I'd already done all my basic outdoor instructing, first aid, general stuff. Then for caving, I had to do this week of being in the van, understanding the rhythm of how it works. Then I had to do 3 days where we had to be able to basically draw the map, draw the cave, all the entrance and exits. Then we did a whole lot of scenario training. And it was everything from headlamp gone out to someone's broken an ankle to someone's missing. And then you're allowed to be a second lead. Then you had to do a whole season before you could actually lead that group. There's a really robust, training structure, competency. And again, I think that's going to really come out around I look at it from an anthropological political science perspective, and the thing about New Zealand is we're really proud of the fact that we get stuff done. And number 8 wire, we're innovation, and we make do because we're on the other side of the planet from Mother England, and it's 6 months for it to come by boat. But there's this moment where you go from adapting to hitting a rumble strip and getting into normalized deviance and not knowing what you don't know about outdoor instructing or caving or whatever it is when you are standing in loco parentis for a group of teenagers. Again, I'm a mother with an 8-year-old son. I don't know what I'd do if he didn't come home from a situation like that.
Yeah. All right. Sorry about the question about White Island, but it is quite relevant, and not particularly. I'm surprised how lax things are, but you're right. I think from what I've seen in New Zealand, it's she'll be right. I mean, Australia, we used to be she'll be right, but I think New Zealand is 20 years behind with the she'll be right and everything will be okay if we just give it a go, and maybe perhaps it won't.
Well, this is the thing with B&D doors. Like sometimes I joke about, and the further away from Auckland, it feels like the worse you get, which is why I'm so careful about who and what I work with. But when I worked for B&D doors, once a month, I got flown across the ditch to sit in Sydney at the big head office. And pretty much it was a beat up of how New Zealand's doing everything wrong. But I'm like, that's not in my legislation. I have a unionized workforce. I can't enforce things that aren't legislated. So this was back in sort of 2006-ish. And then same thing. I'd go up to the head office in Clontarf and see the standards of things that were being rolled out. And for me, trying to get the feasibility and the budget and the sign off and everything, it just wasn't going to happen. Yeah. And again, like what we're really struggling with is, so our regulator is so under-resourced. There was a webinar where Selena Armstrong, who's CEO of the New Zealand Institute of Safety Management, interviewed Phil Parks, who's the CEO of WorkSafe, and I came away thinking, good grief, if you were the CEO of a corporate normal organization, well, you know, like a normal commercial organization, and you gave the answers of, we don't have the resources to do that, you need to sort that out yourself, chances are you might end up with a preemptive court case.
Yes.
And so like they'll sit there, I don't know what the exact numbers is, but they'll say, oh, you know, we've got 300 inspectors with warrants. Well, the thing is, if 120 of those are actually sitting in head office in Wellington writing policy, that's not the people that are out on the ground. And from what I've heard, like, you know, they bring these inspectors in, they pay a ridiculous, it's a lot of money to train an inspector and get them up to standard. And then the churn and loss is huge. And again, you know, one of the things that came out of Pike River was the fact that we didn't have enough mine inspectors. And, you know, it's really hard, so this year, in January after Christmas, I came home and was doing a whole lot of site visits, and I saw project managers and foremans and supervisors who looked like they hadn't had a holiday. Yep. You know, like the stress in the constructive industry is really high. They can't get resources, they can't get product, shifts happening, can't follow the critical path. And I'll just walk on site and say, hey, what's happening? And boy, do they tell me. And it's a lot of listening. It's a lot of putting Rosa's work into practice. But when you have people that are that stressed, it's getting, and a lot of the other thing with me is a lot of my clients work down the subcontracting chain. Like I don't want to work for a principal and manage some huge place. I like working with scrappy, innovative people. And the thing is that it is getting to the point where on certain sites, like I breathe a huge sigh of relief when my team is packed up and gone. There's other areas where I'm like, the phone rings and I'm looking at it going, what is this going to be? And like one thing I find really interesting is there was a prediction at the start of COVID that there'd be a lot of workplace incidents. You know, people would be so stressed and this would be happening. But in actual fact, a lot of the stats went down. And, you know, you can look at the data and go, well, the truth is there wasn't a lot of people at work. But even in those critical industries, people were so aware of what they were doing. It was great. Whereas I think right now, people are so fatigued and they're all redlining and they're all burnt out. And I just feel like the next 6 months to the year is going to be forged steel moment. We're all going to get heated up to 1,000 degrees and have the crap beaten out of us. It's going to be hard.
Yeah. Is there any particular reason you think people are feeling that fatigue level at the moment?
I don't know. And again, please remember, I'm not a psychologist. Just my observations are at work, the key things that are driving people insane is you just can't get employees. Like getting skilled, technical people that are going to pass drug tests and things like that is really hard. It's exacerbated in the area I live in because, like in Queenstown, Cromwell, and Wanaka, there are no houses to rent. Like there are literally skilled tradespeople living in their vans when there's snow on the ground. Like it's insane. And you know, I've got one team that often does a big crock pot at lunch just to make sure they know people are getting a good feed in them, that in a warm smoko room. So there's that at work. As I said, there's the issues of the supply chain, and the cost of everything going up. Like someone was telling me Bostik silicon has increased in price by something like 120% over the last 2 years. And up in Auckland, I know what they're doing with tenders and quotes and things is saying this stands for 48 hours because everything's increasing so much. We've just had, we had like basically the government had said we're going to take the tax off diesel, so that's just come off, so the cost of diesel's gone up heaps more, but then what I'm seeing, like as far as mental health goes, the people that are really being affected are the supervisors and the managers that are sort of between 35 and 50, where they are at life. They've still got a big mortgage. A lot of them may have bought their house and got cheap money, and suddenly, you know, they're moving from paying 2.6% on their mortgage to paying 7%. Because in New Zealand, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but we tend to fix our mortgages for, say, 2 to 3 years.
Yep, same thing.
Yeah, and so you now have households where they have to find another $400 a week, or you know, something ridiculous like that. And even if you were a lawyer or an accountant or on a so high-paying job, that would be hard to do. And then the other side to that is we have a real problem with early childhood in New Zealand. We just don't have enough spaces. Like in Cromwell, there's a 3-year waiting list. So you have people that would quite like to go back to work and make things breathe easier, but they can't get the childcare to do it. And so, yeah, and as I said, when you have that responsibility of kids and mortgages, and then you're also having the stress at work, it's like you can't drink from an empty cup.
Yeah. No, it sounds like there's some deep-seated fundamental issues, which sooner or later will come to the head, no doubt. All right, moving on to some happier stuff. Yeah, the principle of Be Safe Now, Employ Me Now. What do they do? What do you do?
Well, it's interesting because back in 2011, I feel like I'd take on anyone, and I'd probably go to the opening of an envelope if I thought that I'd get a client out of it. Yeah, and when I was living in Dunedin from 2011 to 2015, before I got pregnant with Ollie, I was happily doing HR and health and safety. And one of the things that I work really hard with is to build a really solid relationship with the HR team and make sure that we're integrating our approaches, and, you know, I'm not creating own goals that could turn into personal grievances or constructive dismissal. And with each client that I have, when they're talking about things like drugs and alcohol or well-being or stress, I make sure that everything's aligned. And it's amazing how having that no surprises, transparent approach really works. And I get really frustrated when I hear health and safety and HR people going at each other, because it's like we're all going to lose. It's not serving anyone. So the thing is, once I became a mum and discovered that I couldn't just start full-time consulting again after 3 months wrapping my baby in my Superwoman cape, I just decided to focus on health and safety. As I've said before, most of my clients, I do have some bigger clients that I really enjoy working with, but most of them are sort of 20 to 30 people. I will go in and do a full systems operational audit, and then we'll map out what we're going to do over the year and when we can do audits and what we're going to do with training and things like that. Sometimes I do the whole lot for them. Sometimes an office manager will be doing a lot of it, and then I'll just have an oversight, making sure that happens. Sometimes I've got clients that are going for sort of a ISO 45001 audit. I really love going in and working with the team and getting them to the point that they get, no non-conformances in their audit, and they're doing really well, and the auditor's really happy and life's good. Like, I like doing, rather than doing the audit, I like setting people up to win on the audit. And I have been called in, after there's been, say, an accident or something go wrong, with people that want to, work out how can we do a long-term plan. And again, I very much call myself a generalist. It still scares me that you can ask one question to 10 different safety professionals and get 10 different answers.
Yep.
And it's really funny too how my career's evolved, because like back in 2002, I derived my positional power from my knowledge. It's like, I know what we're going to do. Whereas now probably one of the first things I'll say is, that depends, or I don't know. I'm going to do some research. It's a complex issue. Just that whole evolution of not trying to be the police cop / technical expert that can crusade and save the day. Quite a big change in the last 20 years. And yeah, I really enjoy it. I still sometimes, because I used to, in Dunedin, something else I did was careers guidance, executive coaching, and I got a reputation for helping people who had either burnt out or been bullied or had some nasty reason for leaving their executive job, and helping that person take control of their narrative, write their CV, and prepare for interviews in a way that was comfortable and authentic for them. And, manage things like references and reference checks and that whole thing. And that actually brought me quite a lot of joy as well. So occasionally I still get called up to do that, but pretty much it's just bog standard generalist safety. And I do training as well. Although the thing is, we have some fabulous training providers in New Zealand, and I'd rather say, hey, look, go do this. This is all they do, and that's going to meet the needs that we need for this, than deliver it in-house.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. Well, I think we've done a fair chop of an interview today, or chat. Sarah Thomas, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. I will get the words out sooner or later, but for now we will have to leave it there. But I do look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks. It's been an absolute privilege. And as I said, it's still a little bit overwhelming to think that my name's going to be on a podcast list that's got some other very big, amazing names on it too.
And well-deserved being there as well. So thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for listening to Health and Safety Conversations with Tom Bourne. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week.